Hi everyone, welcome back to Be Rich. Happy Sunday evening. I hope your weekend was good, it was productive. By the time this video comes out, I would have been driving to Bangalore and I should be in Bangalore by now. I'll be in Bangalore for a few days before I head out to Singapore. And in Singapore, hopefully I'll get to meet some of you there. I'll be heading back to Bangalore post that, thanks to my kids' vacation holidays there in Singapore. And I do plan to meet some of you in Bangalore by end of the month in May. May 31st is what we have planned. It is an event or a gathering, I should say, more like a meet and greet, which I'm planning to do in Whitefield. One of my friends has, thankfully, has been kind enough to allow to use his colony's, hall. So I'll be sharing the details on Instagram. And if you're interested in meeting me and my team, you can definitely catch up with us in Bangalore on the 31st. As far as Singapore is concerned, those of you who are in Singapore, I don't think there are many of you who follow me over in Singapore, but those who are there can definitely ping me on WhatsApp and we'll catch up in Serangoon Road or somewhere and have some idli, chai, coffee, tea, or maybe you can suggest some place or a venue in Singapore where we can have a cup of something or another. That said, my brother had put up an interesting LinkedIn post about the dominance of dollar, and I had given my feedback to that article. And if you haven't seen that post, go check it out on LinkedIn on Anand's page and my feedback to what he had put up over there. The timing of that post was great because it coincided at the same time when I had downloaded a book which I've just about finished reading. It's a book written by an economist called Kenneth Rogoff, and the book title is Our Dollar, Your Problem. It is a nod to a 1971 Treasury Secretary named John Conley, who famously said these words that the dollar is our currency, but your problem, meaning the world depends on this. Before I get into the book and what the post was about, who's Kenneth Rogoff and why should I be reading his book? Well, he is a former economist of IMF from 2001 to 2003. He's an Harvard economist. He's a grand chess master, right? And he's authored many books. And one of the famous one is with Carmen Reinhardt called This Time It's Different. It's the best seller because it's documented over 800 years of financial crisis in the world, offering deep insight into debt cycles and how economies collapse. That means he's studied this quite well. He's been critical of central banks' compliance into the world and these long-term debt cycles which we run into. He's a balanced thinker and he's a influencer in the global economic thought, and he's always there in a lot of news channels and in forums, on panels, and he's a prolific columnist. He's written many columns in many outlets. Some of them are Financial Times, New York Times, mainly focusing on macroeconomic trends and what's happening in the world. And his latest book is what I said. There are people who think he's a great thinker, who think he's deeply respected academician with a broad macroeconomic perspective, a clear communicator, and has an empirical approach to taking these things. While the flip of it, there are people who think overtly theoretical, and what he proposes is sometimes crazy, like banning large cash denominations, and is impractical for the real world implementation. And his forecasting track record has not been that great. And like many economists, he's got his timings wrong. And like he predicted after the 2008 crisis, there will be a lot of sovereign defaults which did not materialize, right? And his policy influence has been uneven. And a lot of people consider him to be radicalist and an alarmist, and he's a pessimist, and his writing is very cautionary. And this is who he is. So I wanted to lay it out before I get into it, what he has said in the book, because it is important to understand who the author is and if you should be listening to him or not. So I've given you hopefully enough food for thought that he is a scholar. His views have been polarizing. Some people agree with it and some people think he is great and he's correct in what he says. And there's equal number of people who think he's wrong and he may be wrong in what he's saying, that is extremely pessimistic in his view. And this reminds me of someone who you know, who's my brother. My brother has also been accused of being the same, that he's constantly being an alarmist and he's saying the market is going to crash, the market is going to crash. And there are people who think my brother is right and there are people who think my brother is wrong. And my brother's views can be polarizing in that way. So what is this thing about the US dollar which he's been talking about? Well, I believe the dollar is a privilege and it's on borrowed time. And why do I say it's on borrowed time? Because after World War II, the US emerged as an economic superpower because simple reason, the Americans were not affected by World War II. While Europe was devastated and whole of Asia, Japan were all devastated thanks to World War II, the Americans, amidst the infrastructure, came out unscathed during World War II. And another thing was they became global leaders at the end of World War II. They became trusted. Their institutions became trusted. The Federal Reserve was formed and that was trusted. Sorry, the Federal Reserve was formed before that, but it was also trusted for their outlook. And the most important thing the Americans were dependent upon was the Americans were thought of, they had the ability of not doing anything stupid. And that's when, I'm sure a lot of you are already laughing. It was true. There was a time in history when the Americans were looked upon as the people who had the most balanced, who were most thoughtful, who were the most slow to action and not to do anything rash or stupid. And in history, they have proven that over the last 80, 90 years. And now that trust is what is coming to question, according to Kenneth Rogoff. And that's what he says. The problem for the US is not something outside. It is not China or crypto. The problem for the US is it is internal. It is themselves. And the current currency, the global dollar, is a reflection of the trust the world has on the Americans. And that trust is slowly eroding away. And why is that happening? Mainly because of not just because of what's happening with Trump. It is the way they have been weaponizing the American dollar for the last 25, 30 odd years with the use of sanctions, okay, by saying I will control how much access you get to the dollar or not. Throttling it is led to this. Yes, initially it was thought to be great when, they were thought they were policing the world. Initially, most of the world agreed with the policies behind it because they were thought to be doing good. But then when it slowly started being used in views without consensus, when the Americans then would go out and say, we're doing this by ourselves, we're going to do this, and the rest of the world just had to lump it, that's when questions started being raised. The trust started eroding in the dollar. When they stopped asking for global consensus and they started acting like it's ours, we'll do what we want, it is your problem. Like I told you, what John Conway said. Then the second major issue coming into the dollar is the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling is they keep borrowing against the dollar because they can print, and the debt ceiling stunts that has happened between the Democrats and the Republicans and the world always sitting in the balance and watching because our fortunes are tied with the dollar, and the political chaos that comes from that has started slowly eroding away the trust in the dollar. And last, what the Trump and his team have done by questioning the independence of the Fed has signaled alarm bells across the globe, because the Fed was always looked upon as being independent, not influenced by politics, and it was free to operate in that realm, and the world trusted the Americans to hold that to be true. Though the Fed was sitting inside the United States, it was looked upon as being independent. Now that has eroded, which has created further shockwaves and further quakes in the world as far as the dollar is concerned. And last but not least, the national debt to GDP at 120% almost. It's not making sense anymore. You literally lost all your credibility when this comes to realization. The amount of debt the Americans have, and all of that debt is on American dollar. So he draws lessons from history throughout the book, and I do recommend that you read this book. I downloaded it on the Kindle. I could not get a hard copy of this book. That's why I don't have the book sitting here like how Shashwat has. So I'll ask Rupesh to throw up a screenshot of the book cover. I've downloaded it on the Kindle and I read it as an ebook. It's a lovely book. I strongly recommend you read it because the way he presents his argument Then the lessons from history he draws. And one of the biggest lessons he draws on is the British pound, how the British pound did not collapse and disappear overnight, how it lost its status globally because of slowly losing trust. The British Empire, over a period of 100 years, slowly lost trust bit by bit, inch by inch, and finally the world walked away from the British pound. It's the same thing may be happening with the American dollar. It won't crash today, it won't crash tomorrow, but it could slowly fade away, and it will happen slowly and not suddenly, is what he feels. And if that happens, why should you care? What are the implications? Well, that could lead to further inflation in the US, because one of the ways Americans are able to control all their debt is because everyone depends on the dollar. But if that disappears, inflation could rise, borrowing costs could spike, your 401k stock portfolio, they will all feel it. And it's just not the Americans who are going to feel this, even emerging markets, because all emerging markets, all our debts, even corporate debts in India, companies borrow on the dollar outside India, all that will lead to further chaos and further confusion. So is this fear-mongering what Kenneth Rogoff is doing? Or is there some truth in this? I used to think this is pretty much fear-mongering. I never thought this could come in my lifetime. But now seeing what Trump is doing and the way Trump is behaving, maybe. And I think everyone used to ask me 2 years ago, will BRICS come and, will we lose dollar domination thanks to BRICS? I don't think BRICS will be the reason for the dollar dominance. What is going to lose, dollar is going to lose its dominance is purely if the Americans shoot themselves on the foot, and they seem to be doing this. Because the strength of dollar is not built on gold, the strength of dollar is built on trust. And that trust can be broken. And trust is something very hard to fix once it's broken. All of you know this as human beings. Once someone loses our trust, we don't easily give it back to them. So give me your feedback. I would love to hear what you thought of what I said. If you have not read Anand's post, please go to LinkedIn and read his post and read what I wrote and reply to that. And I would love to hear your feedback on that. If not, read this book. At least I strongly recommend you read this book. Even if you agree or disagree with it, just to get a balanced viewpoint. I always think hearing both sides of the story is important as a value investor, so you can see opportunities when they arise. So nothing else much more to say on this Sunday. I hope you had a wonderful week and you may rest and recuperated well, and you get ready to get back at it on a Monday morning. For those of you on Instagram following me with Indian stocks, it will be our Tiffin Coffee range all over again, looking at opportunities in Tiffin Coffee range as we've gone through this year. For the rest of you in the global market, American markets and Japanese markets, I hope you keep your investments as smart and safe as Anand says, and keep it in Tiffin Coffee ranges there too. Thank you for watching Be Rich today. I hope you had a wonderful few moments shared with me as I spoke about this. And I would love to hear your comments on this, as I said. Good night.